Hi, my name is Miles Goldsmith, and this is my podcast, Game Design Hour, where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I interview John Duffill about his work on the video game PC Building Simulator. Before we get into today's interview, I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link in the description. If you want to save 20% off your next order, stick around until the end of the episode. Let's get into the interview.
Hi, Miles.
Hi.
It's super early over there.
Yeah. When did you first realize you wanted to work in the video game industry?
I always remember my mum saying to me as a kid that I'd never make any money out of video games, and I played them too much. But I didn't really think about video games as a job until after university. So I did electronic engineering at uni. And then after that, I did a testing job at Lionhead for the summer. And then kind of went from there, really. You suddenly realize it's a really nice place to work and a nice industry to be in, and it's something that you enjoy doing. Never left, so worked my way up from there, really.
How did the idea for PC Building Simulator first originate?
I worked for a company called the Irregular Corporation. We were looking at simulator games, and a demo popped up on Itch. That was done by Gloria Kiss. So his original idea. And so he did a demo and we found it on Itch. We played it. That was great. Really enjoyed it. And so we got in contact with him. And it all seemed to fit into place. We were looking at a lot of simulated games back then in terms of things like Car Mechanics Sim and sort of Farming Simulator, but definitely Car Mechanics Sim in that sense of taking things apart and putting them back together again. Now, PC seemed suddenly why has someone not thought of this before? Especially as it's being played so much on things like Steam, stuff like that. So people were already on the platform that you were wanting to build, so there's already an inbuilt knowledge there. So yeah, that's how the idea originally sort of came up.
How large was the team that worked on PC Building Simulator?
It was really small. So Claudio initially, just him doing the demo, and then we started developing it with him. So I was helping him out as a designer, and then it became clear quite quickly that Claudio, it was his first game that he'd ever made. He just didn't really have the knowledge or experience in order to sort of take it forward. So we actually hired in a programmer, a guy called Mark Sheehan, and we started working on it. So it was essentially just the three of us. It was Stuart Morton, who was a producer, Mark, who was a coder, and me, who's a designer. And we farmed stuff out to other people as well. So we had sort of 5 to 6 people in terms of sort of helping out with things like art assets and UI and stuff like that. But in terms of people who were on it the whole time, it was just the three of us. So we were very lucky that we were able to be such a small group making it, to be honest with you, because it meant that we could pivot quite quickly and, we could push the boundaries a little bit. So that's really good.
How much research into the process of building PC needed to be done while working on this game?
Loads, absolutely loads. I think that was one of the first things, obviously, that you start to realize. I mean, building PCs has got a lot easier than it was sort of back in the 90s and 2000s. But there was still an awful lot of knowledge that I had to sort of assimilate. And then also trying to figure out which parts of that you want to bring into the game. And how you gamify those things as well, so that people can understand them and be true to life, but also be fun. Do you know what I mean? So things like RAM settings, we didn't bother with loads of RAM stuff because RAM is just this dark art that is just insane. But overclocking, we could create a more simplified version of it, and people really enjoyed sort of playing with it. So to answer your question, a lot. I'm now sort of slightly resident expert in terms of being able to build PCs and stuff.
What does playtesting look like for a smaller game like PC Building Simulator?
So for me, as a designer, I think the having played those sorts of games a lot, sort of simulation games, I think a lot of times people enjoy just sort of making a company, right? Or a little business that they want to sort of succeed at. And so I think to a certain extent, in terms of progression, I'll answer your point in a second, but it's not so much about difficulty or complexity. It's more about how quickly you move through what you're doing to a certain extent. The better you are at it, or the more savvy you are, you will move through the game faster. But someone who isn't can still move through the game, but just move through it slower. So in terms of setting the game up, the large chunk of the game was just set up in order just to move in those directions. And then the playtesting part actually was the beginning bit where you want to onboard people. So playtesting was in some ways annoying because it was, there's lots of stuff you need to go and look at. It's a long game, but also we created it in such a way that once you were first through first sort of 5 levels, we sort of let you go and off you went by yourself to a certain extent, and we could trust more the numbers in our spreadsheets to sort of like make sure that everything was going right. So yeah, it's not the worst game I've ever play tested, but it was a bit painful. But yeah, it was right.
How does the original pitch differ from what you have now out in the world for PC Building Simulator?
I think that there's a lot more content than we probably ever realised that was going to go in, to be honest with you. And it seems something that I'm still amazed by how much people really enjoy getting new components, new parts, and all that sort of stuff, I think. So originally we weren't looking to be anywhere near that sort of complicated, I don't think, in terms of the size of all of it. And the same with things like peripherals. We didn't think people would be interested in peripherals, but they are. We didn't think people would be interested in their sort of workspace and changing that so much, but they are. And so I think a lot of the DLC packs that we have, the new sort of work areas seem to be the most popular, which is always quite surprising. Cosmetically, I suppose. I think I'm always surprised by how much people like to make their world look different. Because me personally, as a gamer, I'm more about systems. That's probably just because I'm a designer and nerd.
Were there any big or interesting bugs that you and the team came across while working?
Yeah, there's one just from the original sort of like setup of the game. The scale was completely off, and so you actually turned out to be much bigger than we thought you were in real space. And so Unity meant that you'd be hearing things from really, really far away, and the sound was always really, really weird for ages until we eventually fixed it. But that meant making everything normal size, and that just created a plethora of ridiculous size bugs. But it's such a simple looking game. I never thought the scale was going to be a problem. Yeah, and I think that's probably the worst one. Generally, it wasn't too bad in terms of bugs. It was more just like annoying little things where some numbers would be slightly out, or something could be slightly broken.
What's one interesting idea that ended up just getting cut from the game?
Depends by what you mean as interesting, to be honest with you, because things that maybe I find interesting, other people don't. That's probably why they got cut. I've always been fascinated by debt in games. I really enjoy debt and the ability to sort of make financial decisions, but we never really sort of like put that in. It's something I was always pushing for, but it was never really explored in a big way. So that's probably something that me personally, I would have liked, but we never did. Apart from that, nothing much hugely, to be honest with you. We were really lucky in terms of like hitting the scope that we were aiming for, and to a certain extent exceeding it, because we were such a small team. We could sort of like pick and choose and put in what we wanted to.
Which aspect of PC Building Simulator did you end up spending the most time working on?
A large chunk of it is balancing the data. So we obviously get loads of new components and putting them all in, making sure that they all function properly and that they work relative to the real world. We've got a team now who also do all the content stuff. So obviously making all the components, like that takes an awful long time, because you'll get some manufacturers will send through CAD models from their actual design, which isn't, that's super helpful, but then others won't. We'll just get sort of photos, and so we then have to go backwards and forward between us and the manufacturers, making sure that they're happy with everything that's on there to a certain extent. And some things, rightly so, manufacturers are particularly, but they want certain things in certain places because they've spent ages on these things and making them. That's probably what takes the longest, putting in all the content.
Was there anything that you had to fight for to get put into the game, or you fought to get put into the game that just never ended up in the game?
Yeah, I think the complexity of the overclocking definitely was something that we pushed hard for, and especially in terms of like being able to teach the players. I think we leaned quite heavily on people's understanding of overclocking of PCs, certainly when the game first came out, because there wasn't a huge amount of onboarding or help. And so that was something, we had to push quite hard for, or I certainly pushed quite hard for within our small team, just to make sure that it sort of worked okay. I think there were lots of elements of complexity, which as a slight spreadsheet nerd, I wanted to go in and actually just made it impractical. And so, there's plenty of sort of things like that. RAM always comes back as one that I'm always like, we eventually did it so that you had to buy, when you bought RAM, you bought individual sticks. But originally I wanted to have packs and then get all the memories times between them so that you could buy, it would be most realistic as you do have in your life with RAM. But that was vetoed, which is fair enough.
Sorry to pop in here, but I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link in the description. If you stick around until the end of the episode, you can find out how you can save 20% off your next order. Let's get back into the interview. How did the scope change from when you first started working on it to now?
The size of the, as I alluded to earlier, the size of the content, I think, is something that's changed a lot. We've got loads more levels than we ever thought we would, loads more components, loads more workspaces for you to work in. We've got 2 DLC packs. So I think the scope is probably, the scope of the content is probably something that's much bigger than it was when we first started out. I think also like things like water cooling, for example. Water cooling wasn't in at launch, early access launch, and then we went for it on that, and it's pretty realistic, and it was quite hardcore to do as well, actually, at that point, because the code was pretty old and pretty gnarly. So there's those sort of things, I think.
What part of the game do you find the most interesting to create?
For me personally, designer, the balancing, like. The spreadsheet that we've got running this thing is vast. It's absolutely massive. But I'm a bit of a spreadsheet nerd anyway, and so quite enjoy building those sorts of things. So I think, that's probably the bit that I enjoyed the most. There's also the nice sort of like all the storyline stuff that happens in the game as well. And I think having a bit of fun with that went a long way, just to make it feel like our game as well. A lot of sim games won't be as silly, I suppose, as we were willing to be, and I think it came out really well. We're really happy with it. But that was very, very funny, like working on that, and enjoyable, just to see how silly we could be.
Earlier, you talked about getting CAD models from the different companies. So for all of your parts, did you work directly with companies who make them to make those parts as lifelike as possible?
Yeah, very much so. We've got a few components in there which we made ourselves initially, which were like sort of not dummy parts, but like the starter parts, because you don't want to go to a manufacturer and say, your part's going to be the rubbish bit that everyone starts with. So we made our own ones for that. Apart from that, everything else we've made with manufacturers. And generally, they're pretty good in terms of helping us out with getting models and stuff like that of their stuff. And also the process, going forward and backwards. It's amazing the amount of detail you can suddenly start to notice, especially with things, like a manufacturer will have maybe 20 different graphics cards, of which they all look pretty similar, but they're not actually, they're all slightly different. They are, even down to like capacitor locations and like chips and stuff like that. So we love to make sure all the details are completely correct, which is good for a game like this.
What was the biggest design challenge you faced while working on PC Building Simulator, and how did you fix it?
There's lots, I think. I mean, it still comes back down to sort of like spreadsheets and things like that, but I won't talk about that anymore because, as you can tell, I'm probably going on a bit too much. Building stuff and getting all the scales correct and getting everything to line up was pretty painful. And after a while, we started putting in systems that allowed us to do it automatically. But certainly there was a lot of trawling through components, making sure things were just up or right, just down right, left and right, before we started unifying stuff and making it easier to build. So that certainly was something that was really hard to work on. It was just a lot of it to do. And I think getting the loop and the cadence and everything in the game again was pretty tricky in terms of we did quite a lot of play testing. We played the beginning of the game quite a lot to make sure it was all right, and like small nuances in terms of how stuff was delivered changed the game quite a lot. And I think we've ended up with a game that is quite relaxing to play, and I think that's where we sort of ended up, which was good, and it seems to be popular.
So what is the process for after you have the finished game, getting it out into the world? So
we were luckily building up quite a good following before we launched into early access. So we had lots of wish lists on Steam, and we, as a publisher, were pushing it quite hard in terms of growing the interest in the game. It wasn't actually too bad a release in terms of getting people to actually notice it. Stu and the marketing guys did an amazing job in terms of making sure people knew it was out there. And then it's one of those games that kind of just seems to just balloon a bit, I think, and barrel roll and just get big. Snowball, that's the word I'm looking for. It sort of snowballs, and it still today sells well. And I think it's just one of those games that people sort of think, I like PCs. I'd like to have a go on it at some point and learn a bit more about them. So yeah, it always seems to work. So yeah, the growth was pretty organic. Yeah, so it wasn't too bad.
Which part of the game did you find the most difficult to design?
Probably the core loop, I think, just in terms of the interactions and the amount of fiddliness we wanted to have, because you want to make sure the player has enough agency that they feel like they're building something and they're not just making the same puzzle over and over again. But at the same time, you don't want to completely overwhelm them or make it really tedious. So I think getting players so they can understand what they need to do, prepare for it, complete it, and then do the work, and then get the reward. And that little loop, once we got that loop down, it was all right. Like everything else, and kind of built on it really well. But making sure we had that core loop of something that was quite interesting to play, and making sure that when people started playing it, they could see what they were doing straight away. And again, another thing that we always try to work on was, instead of teaching players what to do at one point, like at the beginning, a massive tome of information of text. Instead, you want to teach them so that when something goes wrong, it's obviously gone wrong. And so again, making sure that we're using like our color schemes, which are like red, green, and yellow, making sure that we're using those in the right places and that things are logical. So that when players are trying to do something, if it doesn't work, that's fine. They can figure out why that works themselves and sort of answer those questions. And again, sort of building on what players have done previously in terms of how you then explain things later on. So that was probably the hardest bit, I think, initially, design-wise, was just getting it all working. And luckily, with such a small team, we were able to prototype a lot. So design-wise, I did a GDD for it, and I worked out what the initial plan was. From that point, we then riffed quite quickly and just worked on it until it got to a state that we were happy with. So,
Can fans of PC Building Simulator expect to see more updates in the future?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we're really proud of and that we love doing is keeping lots of content going and lots of new stuff. And the PC building crew, the audience are brilliant. They're so involved. They're sometimes too involved when they're telling me off that something's not right, but I do appreciate it, and it's good that that everyone's so engaged. So yes, there will be lots of PC building stuff coming. You don't need to worry about that.
So looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch?
I think when we first launched, the career mode was the way you complete missions was quite black and white. You'd have a list of objectives, you'd fix them and then send it off. And there was no sort of scope for softness. And it's something that we then introduced more of a soft completion sort of criteria. But still, I think, to be honest with you, now I'd like it to be even more soft in terms of being able to allow the player to express themselves. I think a bit more in terms of how they fix things, and to recognise the players doing that. I think that's something which we'll continue to work on. I think and try and improve. I think that's probably the thing. There's large chunks of sort of like players being able to play the game their way to a certain extent, and different things are important for different people. I think that's one of the things I love about, especially all games, but especially this game, is that you find so many people playing it in different ways, and they have certain little they will do. Like some people will always make sure they do, they wire things up in a certain way, or do things in a certain way, or order things in a certain place, and it means but it has no real bearing. But in their own mind, it does. I think that's one of the great things of being a games designer to a certain extent, is it's giving players space to create their own sort of like narratives and their own sort of gameplay, or their own rules in their head. And I think, if you're too prescriptive, you lose some of that.
What has been the biggest lesson that you've learned from working on PC Building Simulator?
Although we did do a fair amount of playtesting, I think probably playtesting a bit more, or certainly things like betas, or like meeting the audience more and sort of finding out what they enjoy about the game. Because while I'd love to say, I'm an amazing designer and I got it right, there was an element of luck in terms of like striking or allowing players to do the kinds of things that they wanted to, and some of those weren't necessarily things that we thought of initially. So I did think getting a little community going, like talking to people, letting them play your game, finding out what they like about it, and what they'd like to see differently is super important. I think probably we would have done that a bit more from a bit earlier on. With PCBS.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to newer game devs trying to get their first game made?
I think seek feedback, I think, probably, as I was just saying just then. But I think, talk to other devs. There's loads of amazing websites you can go on and post your games, post concepts. Like, there's loads of events you can go to where you can meet people. And I think you don't have to worry so much about someone stealing your idea. I think generally the community is pretty good in terms of being trustworthy. And so there's no real downside to going and hearing what other people think. Always remember it's your game, definitely. And you're the one who needs to drive it forwards. But I think creating things in a vacuum can not only make the game maybe a bit less than it would be, but also I think psychologically, and morale-wise as well, I think it could be quite a lonely place to be working on something. Like, even if you've got quite a big team, if you're doing it in isolation. So I think getting it out there and seeing people enjoy it, I think it helps remind you what it was initially that you wanted to make. And seeing people enjoy their games, enjoy your games is always, again, it's a great motivator. Yeah.
So what's next for you? What are you working on now?
So the Irregular Corporation, so we're the publisher, obviously, and we got bought by Epic as part of the Mediatonic merger. And so we're now part of Epic's Games Publishing. So we're carrying on being publishers, just with some different games now. So yeah, there's not a huge amount I can talk to you about in terms of what's coming up. But yeah, essentially it's that, supporting developers, helping them make the best games they can make, offering design support from my side, certainly, and with my team, and just sort of like helping to nurture and make people happy making their games, I think, and making them successful making their games. That's something that we really, really enjoy doing. So yeah, that's what we're up to now. It's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. If you're enjoying the podcast, consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. It would really help out the show. Also, make sure to check out today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find their website using the link in the description, or you can go and check out the Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs. If you want to save 20% off your next order, use code GDH20. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.